My name is Wade. I'm a teaching pastor here at Wake, and we're excited that you have joined us this morning. If you didn't know this about me, I actually grew up in church. I actually attended a youth group in the early 2000s. Some of you might have attended a youth group 20-so years ago. And if you didn't know this, we're built different. Youth groups 20 years ago, they were the Wild West. Anything could happen on any given week. I think about the youth group games that we played during service. If we played these games today, they would be, if not illegal, certainly unethical. I remember showing up to a youth group, not my youth group, but showing up to a youth group, and the youth pastor, he brought a Happy Meal on stage, and he said, I'm going to give a prize to one person who can eat this Happy Meal in 2 minutes. You had the hamburger, the French fries, the orange Fanta, and of course there was, 20 young gentlemen who were ready to partake in this McDonald's feast. And so he got one of them, and they came up, and he said, oh, here you go. But right before he handed them the Happy Meal, he pulled out, like a magician, he pulled out a blender. And he said, first, I need to make a smoothie. And he put the hamburger in the blender, and he put the French fries in the blender, and he poured the orange Fanta drink into the blender. He might have even put the Happy Meal toy in the blender. I don't know. At that point, I turned my eyes away. And he blended it up. And here's the deal. It wasn't like this was a great prize. It was like a $5 gift card to Walmart. It was wild times 20 years ago. And I don't know what it was, but all of our youth group names sounded dangerous. If I were a first-time guest, I would not let my child attend these youth groups. It's like, hey, welcome everybody. If you've got a student 12 to 18 years of age, we'd like to welcome them to our youth ministry, Extreme Fire. We'd like to welcome them to Ransom. Who got kidnapped here? Little Jimmy will not be attending Riot Student Ministries. You're going to have to destroy private property without him this Wednesday. I miss those days. Miss those days. Haven't had a McDonald's Happy Meal smoothie in so long. There was also this language or this verbiage that was used in youth groups. I feel like it wasn't in our youth group. Our youth pastor was great. Pastor Moak, if you're watching this right now, you're incredible. I'm here because of you. But there's this language in youth camps and youth conventions. We were told that God created us to change the world. And these stories were given to us. We were told stories about missionaries who traveled overseas, kids who started Bible studies at their school and their entire school came to Jesus, people who were called to minister and pastored large churches. There was even this famous song that we would sing that said, I'm going to be a history maker in this place. There's this idea that if God called you into ministry, there was something special about you. We all thought we were going to change the world, and then we grew up, and guess what happened? We did it. All of us changed the world. No, most of us grew up to live pretty ordinary lives. We thought we were going to change the world, and now we're just changing diapers, right? We wake up with back pain, and we're changing diapers. That is our life now. I became a pastor when I was 22 years old, which is crazy to think about, a 22-year-old youth pastor, but that's how we got all those crazy youth group games. I was a 22-year-old youth pastor. I pastored for, 6-7 years, and I thought that was going to be the rest of my life. That I was going to be in ministry, full-time vocational ministry in the church for the rest of my life. And then, about 10 years ago, my life made a turn. And I was no longer serving as a full-time pastor. For a time, I wasn't even working at a church at all. In a sense, I took a I took a desk job, and it took a little bit of time for me to work through all of that. If I'm candid, it felt off. I was trying to reconcile this ministry I thought God had given me with my life. Maybe you are struggling with a similar dilemma. Maybe you feel called, I'm called to serve God in some way. But the truth is, most of us are never going to be on stage. Most of us are never going to play in the worship band. Most of us will probably never even lead a Bible study. And it can be really easy when we're in that situation to begin to separate ministry is sacred, and then everything else in life. And what usually happens is there's this idea, and maybe we don't verbalize it, but this idea that ministry is for the people who work in the church, and they serve the rest of us. These are the people who share the gospel. These are the people who do the work of ministry. And instead, I'm just a part of the church. I know for me, when I wasn't serving at church, it became easy to think of ministry as something that someone else does. And what happens when we do that is we can be enclosed in our own cocoon. Have you ever met someone and they attend church, and yet they're very self-absorbed? If you need help from them, they're really not available. Maybe they give you some words, maybe they give you some empathy, but there's no action. Have you ever met someone in your neighborhood or someone in your workplace, and you've known them for a long time, and you figure out that they're a Christian, and you're surprised because you never got that vibe? Have you ever been that person? It seems that they are concerned only with themselves, and there's no ministry happening in their lives. When you hear about the suffering of others or your friends or the needs around the world, are you unfazed? Is that someone else's problem, someone else's ministry? Perhaps you struggle to see how your life can be sacred and holy because you're home changing diapers. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you're a manager. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, and you struggle to see how God can use that as a ministry. If that's you, this passage from the Apostle Paul can guide us to a life that's not separated between sacred and secular, but a life that is a ministry to the world. I just read you the passage. Let me give you some background. So at this time, the Apostle Paul is under house arrest in Rome, and he's awaiting his day in court. He's awaiting his opportunity to plead his case in front of the Roman emperor. And at this time, historians believe that it was probably Nero who ruled the Roman Empire. At this time, Nero would have been the guy that Paul eventually stands in front of. Nero was not a good person. I can't share with you all of the things that Nero did because there are children in the room. If you made Nero mad, one of two things happened to you. You were killed, or you were banished from Rome, and shortly later you died under mysterious circumstances. He's not a good person, and later on in his rule, he turned on Christians. He arrested and he tortured all of the Christians in Rome. He crucified them. He threw them to the wild animals in the Colosseum. He even burned them alive as living torches. And here's Paul awaiting his day in front of Nero. It doesn't seem like there's much hope. And he's been speaking up until this point about Christ and giving us this rich theology, and then it's almost as if he pauses. He pauses and he says, let me tell you why I'm here. All of that I talked about, that's why I'm here today. God's calling on his life has led him to imprisonment. And he talks about this mystery that's been revealed. Essentially, he sees something very powerful about the gospel, that God used the Mosaic law to get his people to a place for Jesus. But now that Jesus has come, the kingdom is here. And now, no longer did someone have to follow the Mosaic law in order to know God. God was reconciling the nations to himself. That you didn't have to be Jewish in order to have a relationship with God. And it's partly that reason that Paul's arrested. He was arrested in Jerusalem, and he was worried he wouldn't get his fair hearing in court. And so as a Roman citizen, he had this perk. He could say, I appeal to Caesar. And so that's where he went. He went to Rome to plead his case to Caesar. God had revealed to Paul his plan to unite the world into the family of God, the church. Paul's mission, his specific mission, was to take the message of Christ to the Gentiles. And he says, I am happy to do that despite the suffering, despite the pain. I want to pause for a moment and just consider this picture of Christianity. You know, there's this general idea, especially if you talk to someone who may be a critic of Christianity, that Christianity is a white man's religion, that it's an American religion, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Since its genesis, Christianity has been a diverse movement. And this is what informed, energized Paul's ministry to the Gentiles. I love how Rebecca McLaughlin says it. She says, but when it comes to diversity, the cards are firmly in our hands. Christianity is the most culturally and ethically diverse belief system in the world. John Stott, he says this, the church as a multiracial, multicultural community is like a beautiful tapestry. Its members come from a wide range of colorful backgrounds. No other human community resembles it. Its diversity and harmony are unique. And Paul understands this. I love here at Wake, I feel like we have a fairly diverse church, which is great. It's funny because most of the time when you hear pastors say, hey, our church is diverse, you look out and most of the members look like me, right? They're just like an ordinary, boring white guy, right? Just, I'm white bread. I know what I am. I'm white bread. Whenever I go to the grocery store and I hear the Beatles or Bruce Springsteen come on the radio, I get excited, right? I'm just your average white guy. But I think that Wake is a diverse group, and we pray that it continues to be that way and become more diverse, right? Why? Because heaven will be diverse. And if you don't like diversity, you're not going to enjoy heaven. And Paul, he understands this, and this fuels his ministry. And that's why he's ministering to the people in Ephesus, because he sees that Christ has come to reconcile all people. And that should be, whatever our ministry is, that should be a foundational element. That Christ has come for the rich and for the poor, for people who look like us, for people who don't look like us, for people who speak English, for people who don't speak English. Is our ministry singular, or does it reflect this beautiful tapestry of the gospel? Paul accepts his mission, and he does this with bravery. The contentment is insane in this passage. He says, hey, don't worry about me. I will be fine. I'm doing what God called me to do. And in verse 2, he uses this great phrase. He says that he is an administrator, or he works in the administration of God's grace. That's his role. Admin. He's essentially saying, I am managing someone else's business. I'm not important. Later he would say, I'm the least or the littlest. Instead, it was an honor that God had allowed him to be a part of his plan. It wasn't because of Paul and his virtue and his hard work. It was because God's grace had chosen him for this specific role. He was lost, and Christ came And now he is a part of the family of God, and he wants to bring others to the family of God. This hope gives Paul a surprising perspective. He says at the beginning of this passage, I, Paul, a prisoner of Nero. No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? I, Paul, while under house arrest, I, Paul, a prisoner of Christ. He knows who's really in control. He knows his ministry. His allegiance is to Christ, not Rome, not Nero, not those who wanted to hold on to their old customs, but Jesus. Because the God of the universe has shined his light upon him. I love this phrase. He says, in whom we have boldness and confident access through faith in him. That's what energized his ministry, and that's what will energize our ministry. Realizing that Christ has come for us, and we want to share that with others. In 2010, NBC, the network NBC, shook up their late night programming. And so originally, Jay Leno, he'd been the host of The Tonight Show. They brought in Conan O'Brien. Ratings weren't there, and so they kind of kicked Conan out the door. And they made him sign a contract that he would not be allowed to start a new show or be on television for 6 months. And so what did Conan do? Well, he began a tour called the Legally Prohibited from Being Funny on Television Tour. And he toured the nation. And at the time, I thought Conan O'Brien was just hilarious. And I feel bad for all the people in my youth group at that time because I was just doing a lot of Conan O'Brien gags and hijinks. I would do the thing where he was like, I would do that all the time. And I realize now it's not cool, but I thought it was cool. Maybe it's a little cool. Maybe it's a little bit cool. And I have a lot of money, but my wife, she found a way to get us tickets to this tour. And we show up, and we're in the back row. But a soundboard has essentially taken over our seats. And so we're like, well, we don't have anywhere to sit. And so they upgraded us to the middle of the room. And so I'm there, and at this time in my life, people used to tell me that I look like Conan O'Brien. They would tell me this all the time. There was actually a guy in college. He was the star of the basketball team. He didn't know who I was, but anytime he passed me, he would be like, hey, what's up, Conan? And at first I thought he was saying like, hey, I have the body of Conan the Barbarian, but he was saying I had the body of Conan O'Brien. And so I went to the show, and I did my hair, I did like a comb over like Conan's. And I was at the show, and people were coming up to me, and they're like, oh, you look like Conan O'Brien. Like, I was super, for one time in my life, I was really popular. Everybody thought I was, once again, really cool. And the show goes on, and at the end of the show, Conan just starts going crazy. And that's what makes him so funny. He commits to a bit even if it hurts. And so he's going crazy, and he just starts running through the auditorium, and he ran past our aisle, and he kind of stopped near our aisle. And he sees me, and he's like, what? You, look at that guy's hair. We have the same hair. And he pushes through the crowd, and he gives me this hug, right? And it was like two skeletons hugging each other. You could hear the clank, clank, clank of the bones. And he gives me this hug. And he grabs me, and he runs. He brings me up to the front of the stage. And he goes, hey, everybody, look at this guy. Look at his hair. And we just start jumping up and down. The music's playing. We're vibing, right? We're just jumping up and down. And once again, so popular at this point. And then he runs away. He's gone like a flash of lightning. And I'm still living off the high of that. That was 14 years ago. I'm still living off the high. I tell that story, people seem to like it. And I think the reason why is because there's this idea or this feeling that if someone important or famous were to stop what they were doing, someone you look up to, and look on you, a quote-unquote normal person, there's something about that, looking and gazing at you. And I don't want to turn this into a cheesy sermon illustration, but I almost get this sense from the Apostle Paul that we come with boldness. The God of the universe looked upon us. Even more than that, the God of the universe came to earth. Jesus took all of our sins upon him, and he defeated those sins, and he died and he rose again. And as a result of that, we have this boldness or this access to Christ in faith. And I think sometimes we kind of miss how incredible Jesus looking upon us, or for lack of better words, having a relationship with us, because we hear it all the time. But that's what powers Paul's ministry. That's how he's able to do what he does despite being under house arrest. The God of the universe, he sees us. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Reflections on the Psalm, he talks about how it's hard when you read a good book and you're not able to share that book with somebody else. And when it comes to our ministry, when we truly gaze on the face of God, when we think about and meditate on what Jesus has done for us, it gives us the power that we see from the Apostle Paul to share that with other people. How our ministry becomes that. I love what the theologian Karl Barth says. He says, grace and gratitude belong together like heaven and earth. Grace evokes gratitude like the voice, an echo. Gratitude follows grace like thunder, lightning. When we reflect on Christ, that gratitude naturally comes, and we want to share that with other people. So what's the big idea of this passage? What do we learn by Paul talking about his ministry? We learn this. God is in the process of reconciling the world to Jesus. This grand plan. Paul was called in his unique way to be a part of that process, to be an admin, to be a manager. You too are called in your unique way to be a part of that process. In one sense, each person's ministry is the same. To proclaim Jesus, to love others the way that Jesus did. Regardless of whether we are full-time pastors or not, we have friends and we have families and we have neighbors. And we are called to fulfill that ministry. But then at the same time, each person's ministry is unique. We are not all called to be the Apostle Paul, but we are all called to see our lives as a ministry. In the medieval church, there was this idea that many within leadership argued for. It was this idea that if you were a priest or a nun or a monk, what you did was holy. And if you weren't, what you did was not holy. And then the Protestant Reformation happened in the 1500s, and there was this idea that emerged, this belief that emerged, and we call it the priesthood of all believers. It's the idea that all of us are ministers of the gospel. There is no sacred, work in the church, secular, not work in the church. Everything we do has an opportunity to be holy. Philosopher James K.A. Smith describes it like this. Domestic life is affirmed as a sphere of grace. It's not just priests and nuns who are religious. The butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker can also undertake their mundane, this worldly tasks with a sense of devotion and worship. There is no tier. Paul would be the first to tell you, there is no tier. I'm not important. It's Christ who is important. There's no tier with people who are preachers on top, missionaries on top, and then everybody else. We all have a ministry. What is your ministry? What is your ministry in this moment? As a high school student, as a junior high student, as a lawyer, as a stay-at-home parent, as a teacher, as someone who's retired, what is your ministry? You have a ministry. And don't think you're too young or too old or too poor or because of the way you look, you don't have a ministry. You all have a ministry. You have a ministry to share the good news of Jesus. And I cannot tell you what your specific ministry is. We know what our general ministry is. I can't tell you what your specific ministry is. But I believe that there are some ideas embedded in this passage that can help us to understand and live in that ministry flow. The first is to create margin for ministry. Paul says, I'm a prisoner of Christ. I'm devoted to Christ. But most of us, we're prisoners to other things, aren't we? We're prisoners to our budget. We're slaves to our bills, our commitments, to our schedule, to our level of comfort, or even to our personality. That dictates what we do, what we're devoted to. But our primary aim in life should be to serve Christ in the calling that he gives us. So here's what I would encourage you to do. I would encourage you to look at your budget and create margin for ministry. Some of you are not able to ever be generous because there is no margin. I would look at your time and create margin for ministry. Some of you, you have trouble serving your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors because you're just too busy. Create margin for ministry. Some of you say, well, it's not my personality. Create margin in your personality to stretch yourself, to say, even though it's not easy, God has called me to share the good news of Jesus. And this won't be easy. As we see from Paul, creating margin for ministry landed him in jail. We must take care of ourselves, certainly. We must take care of our families, but we must not set ourselves up as individual kings and queens. The company 3M, they're behind a number of products that we use every single day. They created Scotch tape, NextCare, waterproof bandages, a whole host of other inventions. Post-World War II, they created this thing called the 15% culture, or the 15% rule. And Google's adopted this in a way. But essentially they said that all of their employees could spend 15% of their time just exploring new ideas. And they didn't need to get permission from their supervisor to do so. And out of that came a number of new products. One of my favorites of all time that came from the 15% rule is the Post-it note. I love Post-it notes. There are two types of people in this world. People who love Post-it notes and people who are disorganized, okay? You know who you are. Margin created innovation. Margin in our lives gives us opportunity for ministry. The second thing we can do is we can learn theology. That's a big word, theology. But we are called to love people through our actions in addition to sharing the good news. We all need to learn or be prepared to share the good news verbally. Tony Merida says, not every missionary has to be a tremendous theologian, but every missionary does need to have a firm grasp on the gospel. You don't need to have a PhD in theology. You don't need to be able to answer every single apologetics question. But do you understand the building blocks of your faith? Because if you don't, you're going to be reluctant to share your faith. And I think that's why people don't share their faith as often as they should. I think some of us are shy, some of us are a little insecure because we don't know how to articulate how we feel or what we've learned. Take time to do that. There's this idea of love being connected with attention. What we love, we pay attention to. If we are people of God's word, then naturally, if we love God's word, we will pay attention to it. Do you give attention to the Bible on a daily or weekly basis? Here's a couple of ways that I think you could do this. One way I do this, and this is just an idea, one way that I do this is I like to go through individual books of the Bible, kind of like we're preaching through Ephesians. And I like to read and meditate on that part of Scripture. And then I like to get a book about that book of the Bible. And so I'll read and meditate on Scripture, and then I'll read what someone else, usually an expert, has to say about that. A good series is the Christ-Centered Exposition Bible Commentary series. So it's the Christ-Centered Exposition Bible Commentary series. You can get one on each book of the Bible. And I actually used that as I was preparing for this message, one of the resources I used. So do something like that. Really dig into the Bible to articulate your faith. And then I'll also make a bit of an announcement. Pastor Josh is not here, so he can't stop me, okay? So I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. But the new area, the new space over there is almost done, and it allows us to hopefully early next year, I'll be teaching some Bible and theology classes, and we'll do this per semester. And so I'm really excited about it. If you clapped, you have to come. It's done. You signed a contract. We're going to be going through the Apostles' Creed, hopefully, early next year. So when those opportunities come, be a part of that. Learn theology. The third thing you can do is ask God to help you find your ministry. Paul's passage here and throughout chapter 3 is just bathed in prayer. And he talks about how God revealed his ministry to him. Ask God to reveal your ministry to you. You might say, I'm a teacher and I know I can't preach to my students, but what's my ministry? How can I fulfill that ministry? And then pray a dangerous prayer. Y'all want to hear a really dangerous prayer? Okay, I know it's not Halloween yet, but this is going to scare some of you, okay? Say, God, give me someone this week that will ask me about you. Okay, some of you are like, oh no, that's too much. I got to prepare maybe next year after I go to one of the classes or something. Pray and say, God, help me to find my ministry. Help me to find my ministry. Give me someone that I can show love to. There are people all around us. And then fourth, be content living a hidden life. Be content living a hidden life. Most of us will not pastor churches of thousands of people. We'll never be on stage. Be okay with that. Be okay doing the God-given, honest work that he's given you. Every once in a while, there's a radio station, a Christian radio station in Pittsburgh called Word FM. And they asked me to come on and just kind of talk. I usually do it for the ride home with John and Kathy. They're really great. So if you're ever in Pittsburgh, turn on Word FM. Maybe I'll be on there one day. And recently, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the world and how our knowledge of the world is actually kind of scary. We know every bad thing that happens all at once. And it can be really easy to really not know how to respond, to become depressed. There's so much bad that's happening. And we were discussing this, and John, one of the co-hosts, he said this story. He said years ago he was reading a photography magazine, and the writer of this article said that you could spend your entire life taking pictures within a mile of your home and still not run out of objects and people to photograph. And he said, whenever I get down about the state of the world, it helps me to know that I could spend my entire life just serving the people within a mile of my house and not run out of ministry work. Are you content with that? I think for some of us, we believe, God's going to use me. It has to be in a big way. It is a big way. It just doesn't seem big the way that you put it. Be faithful with a hidden life. George Eliot concludes the book Middlemarch, the novel, with this powerful phrase. She writes, "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." You know, the early church turned the Roman Empire upside down. And the 12 disciples of Jesus, they were the backbone of this movement. But what we don't know is we don't know the names of the countless individuals, the countless Christians who served and loved the people around them. We don't know the names of the people that Nero killed, and yet it was their blood that became the seed of the church. In 200 years, our tombs will be unvisited. That doesn't mean we don't have a ministry right in front of us. I love the 2017 film Dunkirk. It follows the true story of the evacuation of Dunkirk at the opening of World War II. The Allied soldiers, they're in Dunkirk. British soldiers, there's over 300,000 of them. And their backs are against the English Channel. And the Nazis are coming from them. And if the Nazis capture them, it's game over. England falls. They don't know how they're going to get them out. So they sent out a call. And 800 civilian vessels turned up. And these ordinary people with yachts, with fishing boats, with lifeboats, they braved the dangerous waters, the bombing raids, the U-boat threats. And piece by piece, they helped evacuate over 300,000 of the Allied soldiers. They lived to see another day, and essentially the fate of World War II was in their hands. Ordinary individuals. How do we change the world? By not trying to change the world, by just doing what God has given us. And when we all do that, our communities change. Each of us has a role to play, no matter how insignificant we feel. When we come together with our various gifts, our resources, the church can make a profound difference, advancing God's kingdom and serving those in need. You know, in my life, my ministry has changed. I don't work full-time at a church, but I've had an opportunity to serve at a business that works with churches. And I've seen how God has taken this idea of ministry and expanded it in my life. And it's been amazing to see. And I would argue that God can expand your ministry in ways you don't expect and ways you might not even see in this life. But what you do is sacred. It can be holy to God. What's your ministry? Will you prepare for that ministry? Will you create margin? Will you study the gospel to help articulate the gospel? Will you be open to what he's called you to do? And will you put it in his hands, saying, God, if I'm going to live a hidden life, so be it. It's not about me. I'm a manager for your work in the world. What you do is holy and sacred. Will you find your ministry?
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's message on our Wake Church YouTube channel. I pray that this was an encouragement to you and that you are challenged to grow deeper in your faith. If this message has encouraged you, do us a favor and go ahead and share it with a friend. And make sure to subscribe to this channel for more weekly content just like this, and you'll be notified when we go live on Sunday mornings. Lastly, we want to say thank you for your generosity. If you'd like to support our mission, you could go to wakechurch.com/give or simply click on the give button on the screen. Thanks again for tuning in. We love you.